There you go. That's cute. So I've just lifted the box off and pulled the printer out of the packaging. We have the unpacking guide, which is going to run us through all the steps of removing all the packaging and getting this thing ready for use. The first step is to remove the top panel here. So this top panel, we've seen a lot of enclosed printers that have plastic. This is actually it looks like aluminum, but it's a metal top panel. And we've got these little sticker tab things here. So let's remove the 4 of these. And then we should be able to just lift off this top panel. So in step 2 here, it tells you to kind of grab here and here, now that you have the panel off, to lift it out of the lower packaging. I've already removed it from the lower packaging. I grabbed it from the corners right here and just kind of lift it up and had someone pull the packaging out. So that's already done, but the official way is grabbing inside here on both sides. So now it tells us to remove the foam that's at the back of the printer. So you kind of have to rotate the foam like this, 90 degrees, and then you'll be able to wiggle it out. And there's one of these on either side. So rotate, and then you should be able to wiggle like that. Get rid of those. So now we're gonna cut these 2 zip ties. And just be careful you're not hitting the belt or anything. If you have flush cutters, those will work much better than scissors. So right under here where we remove those zip ties, there are these little, in this case, white clips that are attached to the belts. Caution, we don't want to be yanking the belts forward or back, and we ideally don't want to be twisting these clips. So we're going to push them to the outside of the printer like this, which will slide them off the teeth in the belt. Just kind of wiggle and press towards the outside. There we go. And so here you can actually see that the teeth are engaged in these little grooves. Okay, so we'll do this one on this side. Just kind of wiggle. There we go, and that one's off. So now we're going to move the entire, X-axis assembly here to the back, and just kind of grab here and here and slide this backwards slowly. Now that the belts are free to move, we can do that, and we should be able to just pull this out the top. So now we're just going to get rid of these other little stickers that are holding these down. Once we've removed the stickers and the first piece of packaging here, there's now a box of stuff. We're gonna have to bring it out the front door of the printer. Okay, we've already removed all the stickers that were holding the door shut. You can actually see a little bit of glue residue on here. We'll just use some isopropyl alcohol and rub that off. But let's open this and we should be able to pull this out. We have to kind of lift it a little bit out of the packaging. So we'll just take the opportunity to get these out of the way. And now we're going to remove the rest of these zip ties. So much like before, this zip tie is holding on a locking clip or 2 onto the belts. So in this case, we'll slide them towards the back. And then we have a zip tie on either hot end. Being an IDEX, this does have 2. Now we're going to remove the protective film, which is at the bottom here. Should just kind of slide out. It is going to be a little bit tight, but it just slides out from underneath there. Double check to make sure there's essentially nothing orange left other than our boots here, silicone socks. But there should be no more stickers or zip ties or any more of those clips on the belts. We're good. Now we're going to unbox the accessories. There we go. It's actually really nice packaging for what it's worth. So we've got flush cutters, which I could have used for all those zip ties. We have a sharpened small spatula, what looks like a filament spool holder, a USB stick in a fancy protective case, USB cable, so this is a USB-B kind of printer cable, the J1s probably manual, let's take a look. Yep, so they've got the quick start guide. What we looked at was just the unpackaging guide. So there's a quick start guide, there's some safety guidelines, and this looks like a soft cloth, maybe for wiping down these panels. And what they call a calibration card, which has some measurements on it, so we'll keep this safe. And another spool holder, because it is IDEX, so it's gonna has 2 extruders. So we have the build plate. which is textured here. It is glass, and this texture is not like a sticker. It wraps right around the sides. It's almost like powder coated or otherwise, permanently adhered to the glass itself. And judging by looking at it, I don't know what material it is, but I would guess that it's PEI. We'll double check that. We have a very large fan. This is probably exhaust or ventilation or an auxiliary fan. I see ducting at the back here, and it looks like this attaches to the back. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. We have a small accessories box, and in here we have extra silicone socks, some assembly tools, different Allen keys, and a wrench. A bunch of small bolts with Loctite on them, and a kind of cable management little clip with some 3M tape. So that I don't lose these, I'm gonna place them back in this box. Underneath there, level 3, we have 2 spools of filament. So they've given us some Snapmaker. This is PLA, and it looks to be 500 grams, in this case orange. And this one is what color? Oh, that didn't work. And another 500 grams of white PLA. Now, this is regular PLA. They call this breakaway PLA. Last but not least, there is a small tweezer here and a kind of wire brush of sorts. Interesting. And that's it for the accessories. So this fan is indeed an auxiliary part cooling fan. So it goes through that duct in the back here. We're gonna feed the power cord through this horizontal slot here, and then the rest of these just kind of clip in to hold it in place. So it is kind of nice in that accessories kit. The Allen keys are color coded, so they tell you to grab the purple one. We're gonna grab some of those screws or bolts that they had in there. We're gonna need 6 of them. And we're going to screw through the 6 holes in the back of the printer here. So there is 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, and 6. That'll permanently attach the fan to the back. And of course, we can also connect this to that power connector there. Now we're going to install the spool holders. I've obviously turned the printer around. The spool holders have an arrow on them, so arrow goes up, makes sense. So slide that up like that, down like that. There we go. I'm going to deviate from the instructions, or the order of the instructions, a little bit, just because we have the printer turned around like this. We're going to install these spools on the spool holders. So I've used those flush cutters to cut this at about a 45-degree angle, and you want to obviously set it up so that it feeds this direction in, and then we'll do the same thing with the other side. So on the back of the printer, of course, we have our power inlet and our on and off switch. We have our USB port for that USB cable we saw earlier, and there's an auxiliary port, or add-on port as they call it. I'm going to turn the printer on now that I've plugged it in, and you may notice or recall that we didn't install the print bed in here. It specifically said the wizard would tell you when to install it, so I'm going to assume that there's a first run wizard that's going to run on the screen. That print surface is indeed PEI, that, as I said, is bonded to the glass. So let's choose our language. We'll choose English next. I'm a fast reader, so I've already read all of that. You should read it. User experience improvement, anonymous usage statistics, sure. Name our printer, we'll just leave the default name for now. And let's connect to our printer Wi-Fi. Setup is complete. All right, wizard. This is where it's going to do some checks. It says it's going to take about 20 to 30 minutes. So handle the PEI glass with care. Don't touch the PEI plate if the bed's over 40, so that's fine. So it says if you've installed the screws or not purchased the print cooling fan upgrade kit, tap skip. We've already installed it, so we'll hit skip, and we'll remove this protective film. It'll heat the nozzle in the bed. I'll hit next. Oh, we can't hit next yet. It's actually heating. So we can see the left nozzle, the right nozzle, and the bed temperature here. So now that we've gone above about 60 degrees, you could hear the cooling fan on each of the hot ends kick in. All right, now that everything's up to temperature, the next button is highlighted, so we can hit next. It says to clean the nozzles with our wire brush. The nozzles are already clean, so we don't need to do anything here. And I suspect this is where we're going to want to use that leveling card that we got earlier, or the calibration card. So there are 3 points on the bed. One's labeled left point, right point, and datum point. And it's already done the datum point one, but it's just kind of tapping the nozzle against those points repeatedly. So as it's tapping the left point here, we can see on the screen it says, rotate the wheel until this orange bar is kind of at the midpoint. So I will rotate the wheel in the order, or in the direction shown, like that, and then we'll hit next. And now it's going to do the right point, and we'll go through the same process. All right, so calibrated successfully. So we'll hit complete. So now it tells you the two extruders are going to touch the heated bed in sequence, and I calibrate the Z offset of the right extruder to ensure that they work at the right and same height. Makes sense? So loosen the two screws on the right extruder by 1 turn with the H2 hex key. The H2 hex key is the purple one that we used earlier. Okay, so we're going to loosen these screws exactly as the screen showed. So I'm going to turn it 1 full rotation, right about there, and 1 full rotation about there. Okay, and then I'm hitting next on the screen, and it's now heating the nozzles again, which they dropped a little bit in temperature. So now that the nozzles are up to temperature, we can hit next again. We need to clean the nozzles, but in our case, they're both clean, so we'll hit next. Oops, there we go. There we go. So we can just rotate the thumb wheel of the right extruder to move the orange bar to the midpoint. So that's this thumb wheel right here. And I mean, the orange bar is pretty close right now. As I adjust it, you can see the bar move a little bit. Just trying to get it as centered as possible. It appears like this is good enough, but I'd like it to be smack in the middle. There we go. And then we're going to tighten those screws back up. Okay, now it's telling us that the two extruders are going to touch the heated bed in sequence to obtain and calibrate their offsets in the X and Y orientations automatically. And in the center of the bed, there's a little cutout, a little square. It seems like that's what they're going to use. So they got to heat back up. Okay, now that they're back up temperature, I'll hit next. It says to clean them, they're already clean. So hopefully you can see there, what it's doing is it's placed the nozzle in the hole and it's tapping it against the sides. If you've ever used an IDEX printer, X and Y calibration can be finicky, to say the least. So it's nice that this takes a lot of the trial and error work out of the equation. There we go. So now the two extruders have their X and Y offsets calibrated. And I can hit complete. So now it's going to print a built-in model with both extruders, and then we're going to observe the model with the prompts on the touchscreen, and we can check to see if the offset calibrations are all good. So I will hit start. There we go. So now you can see in the background there, it's noticing we need PEI glass. Well, that makes sense. Get it underneath those back clips. Make sure it's centered left to right. That. And then we will hit next. Okay. And now we need to load the filament. So we didn't really fully load the filament. We just slid it into the Bowden tubes there. But we'll go to load the PLA filaments. And we want this to be heated up. I think 200 is probably fine. And we can even check out while it's heating, we can check out this question mark about how to load filament. So remove the top panel, hang the filament onto the holders, push the toggle backwards and hold, and insert the filament into the extruder until we feel resistance, right? And we're gonna do that for both. So let's go ahead and do that. So unlike on the video on the screen here, we have some Bowden tubes that our filament travels through. And we have these little swivel connectors on the extruders, or the hot ends. So there's a little ridge here that's attached to the Bowden tube. So what I'm going to do is insert it straight in until we kind of hit that ridge, and then fold it down on itself, and there's a little pinch point that will hold the Bowden tube down like that. So I'll do the same thing here, slide it in until the ridge hits, bend it down, and snap it in, okay? So that keeps the filament path kind of constrained so that we can have the lid on and not have any clearance issues. So now, as it said, we're going to pull the switch towards the back and push the filament in. So I'm pushing with my hand at the back here until we get resistance, and then let go, like that. And we'll do the same on the other side. So now that the extruders are up to temperature, there was a load button that was highlighted. I hit load on the left one here, and it says the extruders will now move into a position that allows you to load or unload filament, so got it. And if everything went as expected, we've now got filament coming out. So we can hit stop loading, pull off this, and we can see that there was white filament in there from like a factory test, so it's nice that we've purged all that out. We can now do the right-hand side. We'll hit load. And if for some reason it doesn't end up pulling the filament, which you can feel by kind of holding onto it at the back, you can give it a little push, maybe straighten that Bowden tube so that's going straight in, just to make sure that the gear did grab it, and then kind of put everything back. So in the right here, I have the breakaway PLA. And on the spool, it says 220 degrees. So let's make sure we've got this at 220. 200 is acceptable for the orange that was shipped, but let's get this up to 220. You could hear the extruder skipping a little bit, and you could see that it came out like awfully thick, not in the proper thickness. So we're done loading. We're gonna hit print. And now it's going to do the test print there as shown. So we can see the left nozzle heating up to 210. The right nozzle's at like a standby temperature of 160. So as I mentioned, our right nozzle has that white material that's expecting about 220 degrees. There's no way for the printer to know which material we have in which nozzle. So if we hit adjust, we can actually make changes to the set temperature. 210 is fine for the orange. We just want to make sure that our right one is at 220 degrees or so. All right, the print's done, and a couple of these squares actually came detached from the build surface. So that's not ideal. However, what's left here, we can actually see that there's no overlap between the two colors. They haven't bled onto each other or anything like that. If I remove this, you can see that there's a little arrow inset in the middle of the square. And there should be arrows on these ones, but because of the two blocks that came loose, those arrows didn't turn out. But the fact that the squares didn't overlap on each other, the separate colors were completely distinct, tells us that our X and Y offsets are fine. Our Z offsets are also fine because they were at the same height. We didn't have any height issues, but we did have a little bit of an adhesion issue on the one square. Everything else seems to have stuck on there pretty good. I may have touched the build surface with my hand, so I'll blame myself maybe for that one. So I'll wipe it down with some isopropyl alcohol, and maybe we'll give that another shot. The other thing to mention here is because I do have two different materials, which came from the manufacturer, they have two different temperatures. And on the screen here, the right-hand side kept defaulting to 160 degree standby temperature and 200 degree print temperature. And that's not appropriate for that material. That material wants 220 degrees for printing. So every time the right extruder parked itself, it would go down to 160. And when it was coming up to its turn to print, it would go to 200 and I would have to go into this adjust screen that I'm in right now and change it back to 220. And if I didn't, it wasn't extruding properly. I don't know why it's not retaining my override that I'm putting in there. And if it's not going to retain that, then at the very least for this calibration print, you should be instructed to have 2 identical materials, and in which case Snapmaker should send us 2 identical materials. Anyway, check the calibration to see if we see any differently colored areas are flushed with each other like this, and they were. That tells us the Z offset is successful. Is everything good in the X and Y coordinates? Yes, it is. You know, the 4 squares can be broken off, not necessarily completely, and then the XY offset calibration is successful. They were not attached at all to each other, so that's fine. We can hit complete. Okay, we're back and we've got 2 larger test prints here. One of them is done with just in-house PLA, the other is done with the white and orange Snapmaker PLA that came with the machine here. And for these slices, we use Snapmaker Lubin. They're a slicer for this machine, though I know that there's apparently also a plugin for Cura to make Cura fully compatible with this machine as well, because you're probably more familiar with Cura. It's another tool you have to learn otherwise. But we gave it a shot, and these turned out just fine, multicolor like you'd expect. As far as some things to be concerned about when you're printing with IDEX, unlike having a single nozzle where you have a lot of bleed to deal with, if you have, say, blue and white, blue being a very strong color, you need to bleed a lot of white through to make sure there's no remnants of blue in that nozzle. But that's not an issue with IDEX because we have a dedicated blue and white nozzle in this case. The only thing we have to contend with is a little bit of oozing. You know, they do have these little bumper pads, and you can use a prime tower or an ooze shield, which are options in your slicer, to try to handle any oozing that may be occurring. But in our case, we didn't have any issue with that, and they turned out just fine. I'd actually argue that the orange and white one turned out better than the blue one. Just a couple little under extrusion parts on the top here, but this one is absolutely flawless. It's a print in place articulated design. And some of these designs will come in differently. In you know, the optimum case, each of these components is a different object. They're arranged like this, but they're individual pieces, if you will. So you can change nozzle for those individual pieces or color them in your slicer. In some cases, if an object is all one piece, one STL, you may have to slice it up in order to get it to print in different colors, or your particular slicer may have some more advanced options where I can just say this piece here that's not touching any other pieces, make that one white, and so on and so forth. So easiest if you look to start with an object that has been prepared, intended for multicolor or multi-material printing, so you don't have to figure out how to fiddle with the rest of that, right? And then that way each component can be, like I said, dedicated to either nozzle you want in whatever pattern you want. We just did alternating in this case. So other than potentially a new slicer to learn or some fiddling to get Cura to work natively with this printer, we had no issues using it. The output is fantastic, exactly what I'd expect. But like all machines, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. So hopefully we can spend a little bit more time with this and get a better comfort level for what this machine is capable of in the near future. Hopefully you found all that useful. Remember, like and subscribe and ring that bell down below to get notified when we upload more videos like this. Thanks for watching.